Out front with us now, Tony Bourque. He's the lead pastor of Water's Edge Church. That's where John Hauser went for help and food just days before the shooting. Tony, so Hauser comes to your church and spent over an hour there. What was he doing there? What was he like?
Well, when he came to our church, we have a food pantry every Thursday that's open from 10 in the morning till 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And we probably feed between 500 to 600 people every week on that day. And he came to our church just looking for food. But while he was there, he decided to sit down and stay for a while. And he just began to cry. And he cried a lot. And he kept telling our food pantry volunteers that he was severely depressed. And he kept asking for prayer.
And he also has a history of going off on rants. We've heard that from people who knew him in the past. And it seems that he did just that to some of your volunteers. What was he saying?
Well, there was a time when he was crying a lot and asking for prayer. And then my food pantry director, Kelly Stowecki, told me that he stopped doing that for a little while. And then he stood up and he got very loud. And he was basically expressing his dislike for the LGBT community. And one of our volunteers had to tell him that, you know, we don't say those things at our church, and to sit down. And he did. He sat down and got quiet. He began to cry again, and he began to ask for more prayer after that.
And looking back, I mean, this strange encounter must take on an absolutely different meaning for you now.
It does. I heard a teacher by the name of Rob Bell teach last week something that helped me out a lot. He said there's no intellectual category for tragedies and suffering like this. And I tried to tell our volunteers, because they were really beating themselves up after this, thinking they could have said more, they could have done more, and their hearts were hurting for the victims, Jillian and Macy. And I told them, I said, there's no intellectual category for something like this. It's just too big for our minds. And I told them they did all that they could do, and they didn't know what he was planning on doing in Lafayette.
Well, that's for sure. Tony Bourque, thanks so much for your time. And
Thank
also,
you.
Of course. Now, and also joining me now is Buzz von Ornsteiner. He's a forensic psychologist. Buzz, thanks so much for coming in. You just heard from the pastor there. I mean, it gives you a little window in to, if you can, into the mind of this killer. The days before the attack, he goes in, he's asking for forgiveness, he's asking for prayer, he's crying, he's depressed, and he's also going on rants, really homophobic rants. Right. What does that tell you? Was that a cry for help?
Well, if you keep in mind that you're trying to make logic and rationale from a mind that's skewed, and there's mental illness, there's probably personality disorder. You're trying to make sense of a senseless act. What I think, it was planned. This man had anger. That anger was pervasive. This attack was planned, and honestly, he had homosexual rants and blame, but the anger was pervasive. And ultimately, that's what happens with people who have anger issues. Many times they seek to exclaim their viewpoints, but then they seek agreement and they seek relationships with others who agree with them. Finding none of that from the church, he eventually left. But I think he was going to the church to pray, since he felt he was doing God's work. I think he went to the church to pray because he knew that his life might be taken. And again, I don't think he intended on committing suicide. I think his goal, his drive was to kill, to commit mass murder, to make revenge on people that he felt were different from himself, but he also knew that it might jeopardize his own life. And with a personality such as his, narcissistic and antisocial traits, it still was all about him. And so I think doing God's work in his skewed mind, he thought, I'm going to the church and I'm going to have them pray so I can survive this.
And they still are searching for a motive, and the more we learn, the more and more I think that we may never be able to get a firm answer of why. It seems impossible. Buzz, thank you so much for coming in. We appreciate it.